Way back in 2017, Fantasy Flight Games took a chance to create their own line of role-playing product. Genesis was the core system that these games would be built up from and interact with over the next few years. We would see a line of products spring forth, from Android Shadow of the Beanstalker to Realms of Terranoth and then Keyforge, Secrets of the Crucible. But what was by far its most popular and probably most successful hit was Star Wars. This certainly got the most love out of Fantasy Flight Games, and out of its fan base as well. Then in 2019, Fantasy Flight Games decided to hand off all of their role-playing products to parent company Asmodee, which turned it over to Edge Studios. Of course, the unimaginable happened in the form of a pandemic, and it was years before we really even heard anything about new products or even reprints of existing products. Over time, we did get news about reprints for Star Wars and a full conversion of Legend of the Five Rings to 5th edition, as well as a new setting that also delved into the 5e system. Finally, after all these years, we have a brand new Genesis products. This is a review of Twilight Imperium, Embers of the Imperium. Let's dive in. Here we have our book, Twilight Imperium, Embers of the Imperium. Copyright date is 2022, published by Edge Studios, and these are the guys that were handed off Fantasy Flight / Asmodee's tabletop role-playing game department. So let's take a look at the back. Twilight Imperium, Embers of the Imperium. The fate of the galaxy rests in your hands. Since the fall of the Lazax Empire, the galaxy has been plagued by thousands of years of chaos, war, and isolation. Now, finally, the once great civilizations have restored some semblance of their former glory, and have cast covetous eyes on the wider galaxy once more. Each of the major galactic powers has sent representatives to the ancient imperial capital of Mechatol Rex. There they have jointly reconvened the Galactic Council, publicly pledging to work together even as they privately scheme to claim the imperial throne for themselves. But even as they plot to conquer the galaxy, threats both new and old stir at the edges of known space. You are one of the Caleres, an agent of the Council tasked to eliminate those threats. You are empowered with the Council's authority, but burdened with their factionalism and infighting. Unappreciated, unsupported, and all too often expendable, you and your cohort may be the only thing standing between the galaxy and destruction. That was quite a mouthful right there. So let's crack this sucker open and see what we got. Gotta say, I'm really appreciative that the inside covers aren't just standard color, and my book actually came with a free PDF download code, which is pretty nice. I already made use of that. And of course, our book is going to come in several parts. We have character creation, we've got some information about the galaxy, and then we've got some game master stuff. Of course, we do have an introduction chapter, as we do it on all of these types of books, and this one kind of really goes over some of the lore of the galaxy. So if you don't know, Twilight Imperium is a massive board game, kind of like Risk, but with more depth to it. It's one of those games that takes all day just to play, really, if not multiple days. And there's lots of different factions that you can play as, lots of different components to lose, things like that. So let's get started with character creation. If you've ever played any of the Genesis games, then you'll no doubt be familiar with how to create characters. You'll choose a species and a career. Your species will tell you how many wounds and strain you can withstand, as well as how many experience you start with to invest in characteristics, which is this game's version of ability scores, skills, and talents. You'll also have a starting score for all of your characteristics. Character creation is the only time you can use XP to raise characteristics, so it's a good rule of thumb to spend most of your points doing so. You can increase characteristics through the use of cybernetics or talents, the latter of which you'll need to invest a lot of XP to do. There are 15 species to choose from, and I think anyone familiar with Twilight Imperium, the board game, will recognize them. So we have the Kreos, the Drua, the Geshlai, the Hakan, the humans, plain old boring humans, the Hylar, the Letnev, the Nor, the Nazroka, which are my personal favorite, the Sar, the Shikrai, Titans, Winu, Ikshka, and the Israel. And then you also have 9 different careers to choose from. And this is where I have my major critique from when it comes to these Genesis games. I should first tell you that Genesis as a core game was not my first Genesis experience. Star Wars was. In Star Wars, you have actual talent trees that you invest in, and they are different for each class. Some of the talents are generic enough that you can find them in other careers, and given that Star Wars, over the many supplements, has many different careers to spec into, that's to be expected. With Genesis, all you get are your career skills, some recommended equipment, and recommended talents. I don't like this at all. To me, it isn't very exciting knowing that there is very little up front that makes a captain different than a wayfarer other than skills. You could opt to purchase skills not in your career. You could purchase the same talents as everyone else if you meet the requirements. To me, the careers in these Genesis products seem rather lackluster. They just don't get me excited. So what careers do we have to play around with? Well, there are actually 9 different careers. We have the Captain, the Covert Infiltrator, the Field Scholar, the Caleris Investigator, the Caleris Liaison, Orbital Drop Soldier, the Shepherd, the Trail Stalker, and the Wayfarer. And all of these titles kind of do exactly what they say they're going to do. I will say they have certainly added a number of talents across all tiers. If you combine this source book with the core and any other source books, then you'd have a lot more to play with. And last but not least, you get to choose your motivations and who your character swears their allegiance to. You see, your character by some happenstance works for the Caleris, a paramilitary organization that is under the Galactic Council's command, but that doesn't mean they have to be wholly loyal to them. The Caleris is a smorgasbord of different species. This would be a perfect opportunity to spy and discover secrets, or strengthen diplomatic relations. If you've played the board game, you probably have some idea of how many organizations there are. There are 19 here, and most of them are species specific. So you have things like the Argent Flight, the Barony of Letnev, the Clan of Sar, Embers of Muat, Emirates of Hakan, the Empyrean, the Federation of Sol, the Ghosts of Krius, the Mentat Coalition, the Malu Collective, the Nazroka Alliance, the Nomad, the Sardak Noir, the Titans of Ul, the Universities of Jolnar, the Winu, and the Ikshak Kingdom, the Yin Brotherhood, that's a fun one, and the Israel Tribes. Gear is one of those things that really gets me excited in these Genesis games. I really appreciate that there are cultural and manufacturing differences that are both aesthetically and mechanically different. There are lots of different weapons, and then you have mods that can give you bonuses and give you some extra versatility. The same can be said with armor. So how does one go about playing a Genesis game? Well, here comes another major critique. You need the Genesis core rulebook to figure that out. Speaking of which, what do you get in this book? You get 31 pages of rules, a section on how to create generic setting agnostic characters, so in this case boring old humans, and the rest is setting information, as in what are different settings that you can play around with. It's not as in-depth as you might hope, and you're still going to have to do most of the work if you're going at it from scratch. The one good thing I will say about this book is that you can get it in PDF. What makes Genesis stand out from other games is its use of the narrative dice system. As you can see, these dice have different symbols on them. One of the symbols means success, one means failure, one means you get an advantage of some sort, and one means you get a threat or a disadvantage. One means despair, so something really bad is coming your way, and then one means triumph, so something very good is going to happen. Players have their own set of dice, which give successes and advantages. The GM has their own set of dice, which gives failures and threats. These dice are called the difficulty dice. The GM determines how difficult a task is, which equates to how many of those purple dice you roll with your skill dice, either green or yellow. Failures and successes cancel each other out. Advantages and threats cancel each other out. However, despairs and triumph do not. You can have both. It may seem confusing at first, but I got used to all the different symbols and what they mean rather quickly. The difficult part is interpreting the results. You can have a success with some sort of a threat or even a despair. You can have a failure with advantage or even a triumph. These interpretations serve as both a mechanical and narrative benefit. But don't despair. The book gives you some options on how to use advantages and threats, despairs and triumphs. The main thing you need to know is that you have characteristics and you have skills. So let's take a look at Gek and Gak, a character I created for my character vault video. Let's say Gek wants to use computers to hack into a system. Computers is an intellect skill, and his intellect is 4. His computers is 1. We start with the biggest number, in this case 4. He's going to roll 4 basic dice, the green ones. The 1 means we get to upgrade one of those dice once. So get rid of one of those green dice and add a yellow die. The GM will determine the difficulty, which could be 2 purple difficulty dice. So roll all the dice and interpret the results. You can get boosts, which are temporary dice for when things go your way, and setback dice for when things are not in your favor. So think of things like rough terrain or dim light, things like that. I absolutely love this system. It's different than your standard roll a d20 and you either succeed or you fail. Here there are different degrees of success and different degrees of failure in the fact that you can mix and match successes with advantages and threats or even despairs and triumphs. You can succeed with some setback. You can also fail, but with style. Interpreting the results, or at least to me, is fun. Games that add degrees of success and failure are games that really lend themselves to better gameplay and better stories. So what does the GM get to play around with? Well, let's start with vehicles. It's a space opera. What did you expect? Of course there are going to be spaceships and other vehicles. And once again, there are a plethora of vehicles. But for most of these, we also get alternate variants. So let's take a look at the personal transport, for example. The alternate variants include a monoride or a hauler. Whereas with this heavy mech, we can have an Hacken Pride of Kanara, or a Federation ZS Thunderbolt M Mark II, or a Letnev Dunlane Reaper. They do have different stats for some of those too, which makes it even better. Ships do come with their own stats and weaponry. By the way, if you get blasted with a ship, chances are you're not surviving, unlike some other games I know of. Because movement in combat is range band based, aerial/space combat is somewhat fluid. The pilot and anyone else who has a job in the ship has actions that they can perform. If you really want more depth in your ship combat, I suggest taking a look at the Star Wars games and some of their supplements. It really does some cool things, and it's one of my favorite aerial combat systems that's narrative based. That means it's not super duper tactical. Let's talk about the galaxy. It's huge! As is to be expected. You get lots of planets to play around with, or at least some of the major worlds for some of these species, and a few that aren't. And some of them even come with plot threads. Depending on the color determines how bad things are going to get when you get there. A few examples of these planets include Mechatol Rex, which is where the Galactic Council is based off of, Jord, Arc Prime and Renterra, Elysium, Arcturus and Space Station Sumerian. And then further down the line, you've got some of the more places that you probably don't want to go, like Mordai 2, Ixth, and Null. You do get a chapter on Caleras itself, which is something that is brand new to the setting. In order to bring different species that usually war with each other to play well together, developers created the Caleras to give them some common ground. Here you get details on how it's run and its position in the galaxy, which isn't very favorable in most areas. I do really like this map of the Caleras headquarters. Kinda sucks that it's on Mechatol Rex, which is a barren world, so not a very pretty place to visit from time to time, but the map is actually good looking. My favorite part is the adversary chapter. With so many species in the galaxy, you can imagine how many different NPCs you can have in your game, aside from creatures. If you use the generic NPC stat block, but you want to use the Hacken, you just give that stat block the Hacken related ability listed on that species stat block, the one that's actually in the species chapter. Adversaries are divided into 3 groups. You have minions, rivals, and nemesis. Minions are the mooks. They come in packs though. They are different from the other 2 levels in that all minions in that group add to whatever skill they are using. They can only use a skill they are trained in, however. Rivals are the next in line and are somewhat tougher than minions. They are strong enough to act on their own, usually have more soak and more wounds. Like minions, they don't take strain damage. Instead, it is applied as wound damage. Nemesis are your big bad bosses. These guys are tough. Get upgrades on skills and defenses and have a special rule that they can go twice in a single round when certain conditions are met and if you like playing that way. I really like how this chapter separates the power level of an adversary. Each adversary has 3 symbols with a number. The fist is their overall combat strength. The mind is their overall social strength. The diamond is their general strength. I really like this because not all adversaries are going to be battle hardened. Some are just as dangerous with their words than they would be with a weapon in hand. Last, we get a chapter on advice for how to run the game. This isn't really anything new, but it does give you some plot hooks, and I kind of really like how they go about creating really short adventures, like by utilizing some of these hooks, some of these challenges and escalations, and some of these climaxes. You can mix and match those to create some really short adventures for your players. I just kind of really wish that there was an actual set adventure, like a starting adventure. But we do get a couple of different scenarios with some adversary stat blocks that are new for that specific scenario. It goes without saying that Genesis, specifically Star Wars, is my favorite system, period. This is what I play with my gaming group every Saturday, and while I've tried to do other games over the years, we've always come back to Star Wars. I don't think we're going to be getting any new Star Wars content for that line of products, ever, and if on the off chance we do, it's going to be for a good long while. If Edge Studios can actually keep the support for this product by, adding new content or even some supplements within the Twilight Imperium universe, then this would be a fine substitution. My main issues are with the Genesis system itself, mainly with how careers and talents work. I like having set parameters for my classes. I want to know that this is what they get and this is what they're really good for. That's what gets me excited to invest in that class. I can see how this would be appealing to some people who want more freedom to really craft a character that could kind of be a jack of all trades, but really good at a certain thing or 2 things. Overall, it gives you better customization. I also don't like how the core rules are in the Genesis Core rulebook. The Genesis Core rulebook as a product isn't so useful for most people. I would have liked to have seen at least a few pages devoted to how skills work and how dice rolling works and how to interpret the dice results. I think that would have been a lot more beneficial to people who are interested in playing Twilight Imperium without having to invest in 2 books to play 1 game. Would I play this with my gaming group? Well, I kind of do, sorta. But if I wanted a change of setting, or even if I wanted to adapt a setting such as Mass Effect, then this is where I would start. If you want a sci-fi game that has really cool gameplay and lots of stuff to play around with, I would suggest you start with this book, and then maybe get one of the other supplements from the Genesis line, depending on what your interests are. Realms of Terranoth is strictly fantasy, but hey, you might actually find some value in that. Shadows of the Beanstalkers is kind of like the cyberpunk side of the Genesis line, so the tech could definitely be implemented in Twilight of Imperium. Secrets of the Crucible is for when you want some weird things to happen with its blend of science and magic. Anyways, that's going to do it for this video. Feel free to leave a comment down below. Give this video a huge thumbs up to support this series, and I will see you guys in the next video.